A pale dawn creeps across the mud-choked encampment, slipping like a thief through the shivering trees. Mist curls over the frozen earth, clinging to the soldiers' cloaks, wrapping their limbs in a cold embrace that feels almost alive. Fingers, blue and cracked, fumble over smoldering embers, coaxing reluctant warmth from ashes that smell of yesterday's fire and yesterday's blood. The scent of rot drifts from the tents, mixed with the metallic tang of iron and sweat, a perfume of despair that settles deep into the lungs. Hunger gnaws with teeth sharper than any blade, hollowing stomachs and dimming spirits. There is no ration, no morsel, that could quiet the endless ache within them. Each man bears a weight unseen. Letters from wives folded in greasy pockets, the ink blurred with tears and smoke. Prayers whispered under ragged breaths to gods who have long seemed indifferent. Memories of hearths that flicker like dying candles in a storm of uncertainty. They sit close to the fire, yet even proximity does not banish the chill, nor does laughter wholly erase the tremor in their hands as they sharpen dull blades on stones that bite back with sparks. Their eyes, though weary, betray a singular, desperate vigilance, flicking to the horizon where the enemy's banners rise like ghosts through the gray haze. Above them, a lone falcon shrieks, circling with the cruelty of inevitability, a messenger of the day's approaching torment. The soldiers' camaraderie is fragile, a delicate latticework of shared survival. A joke drifts across the smoke, hoarse with fatigue, and a stolen slice of bread passes silently between two hands calloused by toil. There is an unspoken vow in these small gestures: to endure, to last another heartbeat against the cruelty of this world. Yet every laugh is edged with futility. They march toward battles that will measure men by suffering, and no valor, no steel, can outweigh the gnawing, silent tyranny of starvation. A young soldier drops a torn glove into the snow, watching it vanish, white against white, swallowed by the frost. In that simple gesture is a quiet testament. The impermanence of human striving, the fragile tether of life in a world that demands more than it gives. Around him, shadows twist in the mist, shaping themselves into specters of friends already lost, comrades whose names are whispered only in fear or prayer. One soldier murmurs to himself, a prayer or a curse, and the words are swallowed by the wind before they can take form. Another leans against a wooden post, eyes closed, hearing the creak of armor, the groan of wagons in the mud, the relentless rhythm of a world that cares nothing for suffering. The fog shifts, shapes emerge, the silhouettes of tents, the skeletal trees, and beyond them, the faint glimmer of banners that mark the enemy's approach. A cold realization settles over the encampment. The war they fight is not merely against men, but against the earth itself, against hunger, against the relentless decay of flesh and spirit. Men exchange glances, and in that silent communion, the truth is recognized. Survival alone is the only victory they might hope for, and even that is fragile. The fire hisses as water drips from frozen eaves, sending small plumes of steam into the gray morning, a momentary illusion of life amidst the pervasive dread. A wolf howls in the distance, answering the falcon above, a sound that stabs through the marrow. The soldiers stiffen, hands tightening on hilts, eyes searching the mist as if meaning could be read in its shifting folds. One reaches into his coat for a letter, fingers brushing the paper like a talisman, and for a fleeting moment, he remembers home. The crackle of the hearth, the scent of baking bread, the laughter of children. Memories that are both balm and torment. Yet there is no pause for longing. The march will resume, and the day will demand more than courage alone can provide. Their lives are measured in steps, in breaths stolen from the cold, in the whispered prayers that may go unanswered. Time drifts, measured only by the rhythm of bell and wind, the distant clang of iron on iron, the faint groan of wagons, the whisper of snow settling on the frozen ground. These are the markers of a day that promises nothing but endurance. The soldiers share glances heavy with understanding. Each face a map of loss, hope, and the stubborn will to endure. They are bound together not by glory, but by necessity, by the unspoken contract that to survive is to honor the memory of those who will not. And yet, beneath that steel veneer of necessity, fear coils, quiet and relentless, wrapping its fingers around hearts and minds. A final bell tolls, distant and hollow, signaling the passage toward the next trial, the next battle where death and exhaustion wait like patient predators. A man shuffles toward the horizon, dragging boots heavy with mud and despair, a silent question etched across his features. What is the price of survival when all that remains is the relentless cold and the echo of absent voices? Around him, the mist swirls once more, consuming footprints, swallowing hopes, and leaving only the faint trace of a life in motion, fragile as smoke, fleeting as a breath. Somewhere in the gray light, a raven flaps across a sky that knows neither mercy nor pause, and the men of the encampment steel themselves, hearts beating in shared rhythm. For the march continues, for the fight must go on, and for endurance alone is the only honor they will carry into the shadow of the next day. The mist clung to the marsh like a shroud, thick and unyielding, curling around gnarled reeds and stagnant pools. In this twilight world, the earth was soft, sucking at the bare feet of the man who ventured deeper with each step. The cold was relentless, crawling through his bones, threading into the marrow itself. But he moved with a quiet purpose, each footfall a deliberate incantation against the marsh's whispered threats. The water lapped at his calves, dark and viscous, hiding the mud and the treacherous roots beneath. A solitary heron lifted in the distance, its wings slicing the fog, a ghostly specter against the waning sky. He paused, knee-deep in the water, and let his hands drift along the surface, stirring the sediment, coaxing the creatures he sought from their hidden burrows. Small, black shadows wriggled along the water, slipping into the skin he offered willingly, drawing the life of his own blood with a tenacity that mirrored his own. The sting was sharp, immediate, yet fleeting, a reminder that every gift exacts a price. Each day he risked infection, gangrene, the insidious march of fever. But fear was a luxury reserved for the weak. He had chosen this path, as generations before him had, a keeper of traditions older than the castles that loomed miles away, a man who held death and healing in the same trembling hands. The rhythm of his work was hypnotic. A plop of foot in mud, the hiss of a leech, a sigh of wind threading through reeds. He moved in silence, but the marsh spoke to him in subtle languages. The croak of frogs like distant drums, the sudden splash of fish fleeing unseen predators, the faint scent of decaying vegetation carried on the breeze. These sounds, these smells, these textures were the pulse of his world. And yet, beneath the monotony, there was a tension that never abated. Every shadow in the water could conceal a snake, a hidden hole that would swallow him, or the creeping rot that came with forgotten cuts. He remembered his father's hands, scarred and calloused, guiding him through the mud as a boy. "Respect the leeches," his father had said, voice low, as if the reeds themselves might overhear. "They take, yes, but they give back more than you understand. They carry life where medicine cannot. Do not fear their hunger. Fear your own ignorance." Those words echoed now, as he watched the small black bodies glide over his skin. A tiny army of healers, silent yet indispensable. Every patient who would sit in a dimly lit chamber, arm extended, pale and trembling, owed a debt to men like him, to the waiters of marshes, the unseen artisans of the body's delicate balances. The day grew colder, the sun a dull disk behind the smothering clouds. His breath rose in faint clouds, mingling with the mist, and for a moment, he felt as though the world had contracted to the span of his shoulders, the reach of his hands. Here he was both master and servant, offering his own body as a bridge between life and death. He lifted his gaze toward the distant trees, gnarled and leafless, black silhouettes against the gray. He imagined the villagers in their homes, torches flickering, children asleep, elders murmuring prayers for strength or mercy. They would never see him. They would never know the hours spent knee-deep in cold water, the relentless stings of leeches, the ache of joints numbed by wet and cold. And yet, their lives flowed smoother because of him, as blood flowed smoother under the careful ministrations of his harvest. The water surged briefly as a heron plunged, scattering shadows into dark eddies. He flinched, instinctive, and then laughed softly at himself, a sound swallowed quickly by the reeds. Solitude was both a burden and a gift. There was no one to witness his toil, no applause for the quiet heroism of endurance. But he had pride, quiet and private, a fire kindled by the knowledge that he preserved a craft few understood, fewer respected. Each scar, each mark left by the creatures he collected, was a badge of honor, a testament to his resilience and his willingness to dwell at the edge of discomfort, between fear and necessity. The sun sank lower, and the mist thickened, turning the water to liquid silver. He paused again, feeling the rhythmic tug of a leech along his forearm, and allowed himself a moment of reflection. Life, he thought, was not always grand or victorious. Sometimes, it was small and secretive, carried in the persistence of a man walking barefoot in a marsh, enduring pain so others might breathe easier, bleed less, or find solace in a healer's humble art. Every drop of blood he gathered was a prayer, a covenant with forces unseen, a subtle defiance of the chaos that lurked beyond human control. The wind whispered through the reeds, carrying scents of mud, decay, and distant smoke. He imagined the chamber of a healer, flickering with torchlight, the scent of herbs strong and pungent, a patient's pulse under careful fingers. Somewhere in that room, a hand would reach toward relief, not knowing the journey that blood had taken before it returned to comfort them. It was a sacred circle, invisible and intimate, linking marsh to chamber, leech to life, suffering to solace. He understood, in a way most never could, that healing was never simple, never clean. It was messy, demanding, and often cruel. Yet it was necessary. As twilight surrendered to night, shadows lengthening and deepening, he began the slow march back across the marsh. His skin was mottled with red dots, his body exhausted, yet his eyes glimmered with quiet triumph. The wind carried a chill that promised frost, but he welcomed it. Pain was a companion, humility a cloak, and survival a subtle victory. He traced the familiar path back, careful not to slip in the sucking mud, each step a meditation, each movement a testament to the life he chose to serve. At the edge of the marsh, where reeds met fir trees and the world seemed to exhale, he paused. He lifted his gaze skyward, where the first stars pricked the velvet dusk. In that silent communion, he allowed himself a fleeting thought of something larger than the swamp, larger than the blood he offered. Perhaps this too was a lesson, that even in the darkest, coldest, most unyielding corners of the world, there was meaning, and that small acts of endurance, small rituals of courage, could ripple outward, touching lives unseen. He waded onto firmer ground, the chill in his bones replaced by a warmth of quiet accomplishment. The marsh receded behind him like a shadow retreating at dawn, and yet its presence lingered, etched into the rhythm of his breath, the ache in his limbs, the prickle of red dots on his skin. He looked back once more at the silvered water, and in the dim light, he saw not danger, but purpose. And he knew that tomorrow he would return, wading again into the cold embrace of the marsh, a solitary guardian of a tradition older than stone, older than kings, carrying life and death together in his bare, enduring hands. Amid the morning mist that clung to the trampled fields like a shroud, the first cries of war tore through the cold air. Smoke curled from distant fires, carrying the bitter tang of iron and burning timber. Amidst this chaos, a young squire moved with deliberate precision, his hands guided by both fear and reverence. Each piece of armor he lifted was heavier than it seemed, yet the weight was not measured in metal alone. It pressed upon his shoulders like the gravity of destiny itself. The knight, his charge, stood silent and still, a monument of steel and resolve, eyes fixed on the horizon where the enemy waited, faceless yet omnipresent. The squire's fingers trembled slightly as he fitted the gorget around the knight's neck, the cold metal biting through his leather gloves. Every strap pulled tight, every hinge secured, was a prayer whispered into the chaos, a plea for endurance, for survival, for mercy. The wind carried the distant clamor of drums and horns, each beat a drum of dread in his chest. He could feel the pulse of battle in the rhythm of hammer against breastplate, the creak of chainmail under strain, the sharp edge of expectation pressing against him like a phantom. This was no ordinary labor. It was an act of devotion, a silent covenant made in the language of steel and sweat. Outside the tent flap, the field was a shifting sea of color and motion. Red banners snapped in the wind, their folds like bloodied tongues warning of the storm to come. Horses snorted and stamped, hooves churning mud into black, sticky mire. The squire's eyes darted over the expanse, cataloging threats he could not name, preparing for a violence he had only glimpsed in fevered dreams. Yet he did not flinch. Each movement of his hands, each measured breath, was a shield in itself. He was unseen, often unnoticed, yet indispensable. Without him, the night might falter. Without him, the oath they had sworn could shatter into smoke and ruin. The clang of armor on armor reverberated through the tent, a percussion of inevitability. The squire's hammer struck the last rivet into place, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to still. He felt the heat of exertion and the chill of fear intertwine, a tangible reminder that life hung precariously in balance. Outside, the drums of war surged louder, carrying with them the scent of sweat and wet earth. The squire's thoughts turned briefly inward, to a mother's lullaby long forgotten, to a father's stern words about honor and duty. He remembered the faces of those who had fallen before him, nameless figures swallowed by the maw of battle, and he vowed silently that this knight would not join them today. The knight turned, lifting his helm, and the squire met his gaze. There was no need for words. In those eyes, he read the silent acknowledgement of trust and the weight of expectation. The battlefield was a beast that fed on hesitation and doubt. Yet here, in this moment of preparation, they were aligned against it. Each leather strap cinched, each plate adjusted, was a promise etched into steel, a pledge that one life would guard another, that one hand would steady another, that one heart would endure the terror of the storm. Outside, the first clash rang out, a distant echo of the carnage soon to consume the field. The squire's hands moved faster, almost instinctively, as if the armor itself demanded urgency. The knight flexed under the weight of the plates, muscles coiling beneath the metallic shell. The squire's fingers found the final buckle, and he paused, breath caught in his throat. This was the fulcrum of their world, the quiet moment before the storm, where every detail mattered and every second could spell life or death. As the gates of war opened, spilling men and horses into the chaos, The squire stepped back, hands stained with oil and dirt, chest heaving from exertion and apprehension. He did not join the charge. He remained a shadow behind the night, a quiet presence on the periphery of violence. Arrows hissed overhead, and the cries of the wounded pierced the din like knives through flesh. Yet in the eye of this tempest, he was calm, vigilant, the anchor to which the night could tether his resolve. Each movement, each glance was a lifeline, a tether to the fragile thread of survival that wound them both through the storm. Hours passed like days as the battle roared and ebbed. Dust and blood mingled in a choking haze, and the squire's ears rang with the clang of steel and the groans of the fallen. Yet still he moved, unseen but indispensable, adjusting, tending, guarding. The night fought, a figure of relentless fury, but the squire's work remained, silent and steadfast, a reminder that heroism is not only in the clash of swords but in the quiet acts that sustain it. When the sun fell low, painting the battlefield in shades of fire and shadow, the fighting slowed to ragged breathing and scattered cries. Bodies lay in twisted communion with mud and blood, and the stench of death was thick enough to taste. The night, bloodied and weary, returned to where the squire waited, and for the first time in hours, their eyes met in relief and recognition. There was no triumph in their gaze, only endurance and the fragile, tremulous hope of another day. The squire helped loosen the armor, each piece sliding off like a burden released, yet the weight on his heart remained. War had passed, but the echoes lingered, invisible and insistent. In the fading light, he stood alone amidst the carnage, a sentinel among the fallen. The clang of distant bells marked the end of combat, but not of duty. He was the unseen guardian, the shadow in the periphery, the hand that steadied the sword before it struck. Tomorrow the world would call them again to the fray, and he would answer, steadfast, unwavering. For in the life of a squire, there is no glory in the sunlit day, only in the survival of those they serve, and the quiet knowledge that in their hands rests the fragile pulse of life itself. And as night descended, swallowing the field in a tapestry of dark and silver, the squire knelt, brushing the mud from his palms, whispering a prayer into the wind. The knight rested nearby, a figure carved from shadow and steel, and together, in silence, they became the memory of all that had been endured. The fires smoldered, the wind carried the scent of iron and ash, and the squire knew his journey would not end here. In every clatter of hooves, in every distant trumpet of war, he would be there, unseen, unyielding, a shadow guarding the fragile flame of life against the darkness of a world that knew only blood and fire. The castle sleeps in a haze of candlelight and shadow. Corridors twist like serpents, their stones slick with the damp breath of the river beyond the walls. In this stillness, a sound breaks the silence, a soft, frantic scurrying over cold stone. The echo reverberates through the hallways, a secret drumbeat of life and decay. Here, in the dim corridors, the rat-catcher moves, body low, eyes sharp as flint. He steps lightly, a ghost among the shadows, listening, calculating. Each pause, each tilt of his head, measures the unseen enemy that spreads in silence. The rats are everywhere, yet nowhere. Their tiny claws click over worn stone, disappearing into cracks and corners, leaving only whispers of their presence. A trail of droppings, a gnawed beam, a faint rustle in the tapestry. These are the signs he follows. He kneels, examining a trap, fingertips brushing against the cold iron, feeling the weight of a responsibility most would not understand. The smell of the castle hangs heavy in the air. Damp stone, burning tallow, and beneath it, the tang of decay. Disease lingers here, unseen, patient, and he alone is sworn to battle it. He carries his tools like extensions of himself, rusted iron snares, leather pouches of powdered poison, and nets woven tight enough to snatch the quickest intruder. Every piece is both weapon and risk. A single misstep, a single careless breath, and the line between hunter and hunted blurs. Yet he moves with certainty. There is no hesitation in the way he sets a trap in the shadow of a wine cellar or sprinkles powder along the hidden passage behind the kitchens. This is his kingdom, a realm ruled not by kings or knights, but by silence and the tireless pursuit of life preserved. The castle is a living thing, and he moves through its arteries with intimate knowledge. He hears the whisper of rats in the rafters as a low, urgent murmur. He feels the vibrations of tiny claws over the wooden beams beneath his knees. In the kitchens, he pauses. The cook's daughter hums a tune over a pot of stew, unaware of the tiny marauders in the corners. The boy in him, the memory of hunger, of fleas biting at the nape of his neck, stirs. He imagines the plague that could sweep through these halls if the rats were left unchecked. And he is resolved. His work is unseen, unpraised, yet indispensable. The traps spring quietly, metal snapping shut, and the soft, muffled squeak fades into nothing. He checks each carefully, hands steady, eyes unwavering. Each rat caught is a victory in a war that is never truly won. The poison takes patience, knowledge, and precision. Too little and it fails, too much, and it endangers those he protects. He studies the shadows as if they are pages of a book, reading the story of infestation in every corner, every darkened archway. The air is thick with dust and the faint stench of past battles fought against vermin. He inhales, calculating, learning, planning the next move in this endless, invisible war. At times, he pauses, listening to the heartbeat of the castle, a rhythm he has come to know as well as his own. The distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the murmur of servants in the lower halls, the faint shuffle of a rat behind a wall, all combine into a symphony of life and death. He feels the weight of it, the precariousness of human existence tethered to fragile walls and the whims of chance. A single disease carried by a tiny creature could undo the labor of a lifetime, the safety of 100 souls. And yet he is here, unseen, the silent sentinel. Sometimes he thinks of the families he protects, the lord and lady, their children sleeping safely in feather beds. The cook scrubbing the floors without knowledge of the enemy beneath her feet. The soldiers, armored and oblivious, patrolling the outer walls. They live, laugh, eat, and dream. All because he has stalked the shadows, mapped the corners, calculated the danger. His own hunger gnaws at him, his own back aches. His own fingers blister from the toil, but none of it matters. What matters is survival, the preservation of life against a tide no one else notices. The wooden palisade groans under the weight of frost, each plank shivering in protest against the morning chill. Dawn seeps through the gray veil of clouds, pale and reluctant, as if the world itself hesitates to rise. Soldiers lean against the rough timber, shoulders hunched, teeth chattering in rhythm with the wind that cuts through the gaps. Hunger gnaws beneath their ribs like a relentless wolf, silent but insistent. Yet the call of duty moves them forward despite the emptiness. The scent of wet wool mingles with the bitter tang of iron, hanging heavy in the air like a memory of battles past. A faint trace of peat smoke lingers, half-burned and bitter, curling into the mist as if trying to warm the hearts of men who have long since forgotten warmth. One soldier bends, cupping snow in calloused hands, letting it trickle into his mouth. It tastes of nothing but cold. Yet even that sterile frost is sustenance in a land stripped bare by winter and war. Around him, comrades whisper prayers, the tremor in their voices betraying hope clinging to the edge of despair. Fingers trace carved crosses hidden beneath tattered tunics, rubbing symbols into flesh that has known only frostbite and blood. Lanterns sway in the morning haze, their weak flames trembling against the darkness, illuminating faces etched with exhaustion, eyes hollowed by grief. A broken will lies half-submerged in mud, spokes splintered like the skeletons of forgotten days. Nearby, a child's doll floats, abandoned and sodden, its small face frozen in a silent scream. It drifts in the puddle, an unwilling witness to the world they are trying to guard, a world that may never reward their loyalty or mourn their loss. Birds stir in the woods, startled by the slow, deliberate movements of men and horses. They take flight, wings slicing the cold air, a fleeting symbol of freedom, mocking those bound to duty and chains of circumstance. Soldiers kneel beside stones slick with ice, sparks flying as blades meet rock, the fleeting glimmer a small rebellion against the encroaching darkness. The sound is sharp and metallic, echoing against walls of frost, a heartbeat of defiance in a day already burdened with suffering. Letters from home, soaked and illegible, are unfolded again and again, each line a ghost of laughter, a fragment of love, a whisper of the life that waits behind these walls. Fingers trace the blurred ink, as if touch alone could summon the warmth of hearth and mother, the smell of bread baking, or the gentle reprimands of a father whose absence weighs heavier than the cold. Every breath draws a thin ribbon of mist, curling upward in vain against the vast silence of the frozen earth. Each heartbeat is a quiet act of resistance, a claim to life in the face of inevitability. Hunger gnaws, frost bites, yet still they rise, still they move, still they endure. A child's laughter, a memory stolen from another life, haunts the wind. It is a reminder of the world they fight to preserve, a world that may already be gone. The palisade, scarred and splintered, stands as both barrier and cage. Behind it, men cling to one another not just for warmth, but for proof of existence, of connection, of the fragile hope that tomorrow might not end in sorrow. The sun rises reluctantly, bleeding red across the horizon. Shadows stretch long and distorted, skeletal fingers reaching across frozen earth. Men cast in silhouette are more than bodies. They are stories, burdens carried silently, names unspoken, losses never accounted for. The snow underfoot is a ledger of footprints, some fresh, some lost to wind and frost, mapping journeys of bravery, desperation, and regret. Horses shiver in their stalls, nostrils steaming, eyes wide with the unspoken question. Will we survive the day? Yet even they seem aware that survival is measured not in distance traveled, but in moments endured, in breaths stolen from a merciless sky. A lone crow arcs above the camp, dark against the cold light, its caw cutting through the mist like a blade. Men pause, not out of superstition, but because even the simplest sound becomes portentous in a world where hope is scarce. Whispers travel like smoke. Stories of friends lost to frostbite, to ambush, to hunger that gnaws with human cruelty as much as nature's. Names are murmured, some familiar, some fading, soft prayers that the living may bear witness, that memory may carry the weight of sacrifice. Smoke from a distant fire curls upward, hinting at life beyond the palisade, but also at death, for every hearth that glows warmly has its shadow, every comfort a cost. Soldiers straighten, rubbing frost from brows, adjusting leather straps, readying themselves. Each man's eyes betray a single thought. Tomorrow will demand more than courage. It will demand the surrender of innocence, the acceptance of pain as a companion, the recognition that in war, survival is both victory and loss. The wind rises, carrying the metallic tang of impending battle and the softer, more insidious scent of decay. Footsteps crunch in rhythm on frozen mud, boots heavy with ice and memory. The palisade creaks again, reminding them that what bends, splinters, and breaks, but still holds. The men hold, too, in their own fragile way, a lattice of flesh and willpower, threaded together by desperation, loyalty, and fear. One soldier pauses, listening to the quiet, to the absence of sound, to the spaces between heartbeats where the world holds its breath. He tastes the cold on his tongue, the snow melting slowly, each drop a whisper of the life that continues despite the encroaching silence. Shadows lengthen as the weak sun climbs higher, touching frost-covered earth with reluctant light. The camp is alive with small motions. A tightened strap, a whispered prayer, the brief exhale of a soldier who wonders how long he can keep moving before the body and soul betray him. In this frozen expanse, time feels suspended. Every sound, every breath, every spark of light is magnified, echoing across snow and timber. The men know that soon, the palisade will no longer be a sanctuary but a stage for reckoning. The horizon waits, indifferent and cold. Yet even here, amid hunger, frost, and the weight of duty, the human heart persists, carrying hope in invisible threads, in glances, in the silent courage of standing when the world whispers to fall. And as the weak sun rises, painting long shadows across ice and mud, a question hangs in the cold air. How much of oneself can one give before there is nothing left to protect, nothing left to remember? The palisade creaks once more, not as a warning, but as a sigh. Men straighten their shoulders. Hands tighten around cold hilts. They will endure another day, for tomorrow is a debt owed. And in endurance, there is both tragedy and a stubborn, flickering defiance. The wind shifts, carrying away the faint laughter of birds, the scent of peat, the whispers of letters from home. The day begins, fragile, uncertain, yet alive. And behind the palisade, on the edge of a war that neither welcomes nor forgives, men march into the unknown. Each step a quiet act of hope, defiance, and remembrance, waiting for the story that the dawn has yet to write. A bell tolls across the empty valley, its voice swallowed by wind and snow. The sound lingers, trembling in the brittle air, bouncing off jagged ridges before vanishing into white silence. Beneath the gray sky, soldiers huddle beneath makeshift shelters, shoulders hunched, hearts stubborn against despair. The earth beneath them is frozen, cracking under weight, a testament to winter's cruelty. Their bellies are hollow, gnawed by hunger, yet their eyes cling to a stubborn ember of defiance. The memory of yesterday's skirmish lingers on their tongues, the coppery taste of blood mingling with the acrid tang of burned thatch. It is a taste that speaks of survival and failure in equal measure. A captain kneels beside a torn map, fingers stiff from frost, tracing routes with meticulous care. Each village marked as a whisper of life untouched, each line a possibility, each blank space a question of fate. He imagines faces he has never seen, children running barefoot through mud, women hauling water from frozen streams, men tending cattle unaware of the shadows that crawl closer each day. The thought is bitter. Hope feels distant, fragile, a thread thinner than a spider's silk under frost. Yet he clings to it, for in a world consumed by chaos, even threads of hope are armor. Around him, boys pressed into service-clutch spoons like swords, their imaginations masking emptiness. One holds a scrap of bread, staring at it as if it were a chalice, imagining a feast that may never arrive. Their eyes are wide with hunger, yet bright with something the older soldiers have lost, a belief that the impossible might still come to pass. The mud clings to boots, to hands, to blood and sweat alike, an unyielding mixture of proof and defiance. Every smudge, every streak, tells a story, a refusal to disappear beneath the weight of the cold, the war, the world. Horses shift their weight on frozen ground, the leather of their harnesses creaking like old wood. Their noses snuffle at the snow in vain, searching for grass that does not exist, and yet they endure. There is a rhythm to their suffering, a steady pulse of life that refuses surrender. A soldier reaches down to pat a flaring nostril, and for a moment, the war seems paused, held at bay by the fragile connection between man and beast. It is fleeting, but enough to remind them of what they fight for, or at least what they fight beside. Whispers travel through the camp, voices hoarse from cold and exhaustion. Stories of home, of mothers and fathers, of siblings long unseen, flicker like candle flames in the minds of men who fear sleep lest it takes them too far from themselves. Prayers rise on frozen breaths, mingling with curses, with grief, with the odd, fleeting laughter that slips through cracks in morale. And then silence, a silence so absolute that even the wind seems afraid to move too quickly. It is a silence that carries weight, the kind that presses into bones, reminding all that the world outside these tents does not pause for suffering. A raven lands atop a broken ladder, dark against the white, its head cocking as if judging the futility of human toil. A thick, unnatural silence hung over the streets, broken only by the occasional groan that slipped from a window, muffled by shudders and fear. The air smelled of rot and damp cloth, and every footstep stirred the scent, sharp and metallic, clinging to the nose like a warning. He moved slowly, deliberately, each hand gloved and wrapped, each breath measured, as though the very act of living could betray him. Around him, the city had become a necropolis. Alleys were littered with bodies stacked like fallen soldiers, their faces frozen in silent terror, their hands grasping nothing but air. The plague had claimed all, and yet life, or what remained of it, persisted only in the shadows, in the hush of abandoned homes and shuttered doors. He knelt beside the first corpse, a woman whose hair, dark and matted, was stuck to the sweat and blood on her forehead. His gloved fingers brushed against her cold cheek, and for a fleeting heartbeat, he imagined her breathing, imagined the life she had carried within her chest, now gone. Her eyes were open, staring, accusing, pleading, but he could not linger. The task demanded speed, ritual, and an unbroken resolve. One wrong move, one slip, and the invisible enemy would claim him too. He lifted her with a practiced motion, the weight of her body pulling at his shoulders, and carried her toward the cart waiting in the square, the wooden wheels creaking against cobblestones wet with rain and decay. The streets were eerily empty, but not lifeless. Rats scuttled among the gutters, their tiny claws clicking against stone as they feasted on what humans had abandoned. The wind whispered through the chimneys and gables, carrying with it fragments of prayers, curses, and cries that seemed to belong to another world. He imagined the city's people hiding behind walls, behind the trembling hope that they might survive another day, and he felt the burden of being the bridge between them and the dead. He was a sentinel in a world unmade, a keeper of the threshold between the living and the forgotten. The work was never-ending. Another body, another stretch of cobbled street lined with shadowed doorways. A child, perhaps no more than 7 winters old, lay on the ground, its small body unnaturally still, lips blue, fingers curled as if in mid-reach for something lost. He swallowed a sudden ache, a tide of grief threatening to crush him, and whispered something he did not fully hear himself repeat. A prayer, a plea, or a remembrance. He wrapped the child in a rough cloth, securing it with a care he did not extend to himself. Each motion was ritual, each placement in the cart a sacred act of witness. He did not mourn openly. He could not. Mourning too loudly was a luxury the plague had stripped from him, from everyone. Yet in the solitude of his task, grief became a companion, a presence as constant as the stench and the shadow of death. The city itself seemed to recoil from him, its walls darkened by soot, its windows staring blankly like eyes that had seen too much. A bell tolled in the distance, hollow and slow, marking an hour none remembered, none cared to remember. His boots left prints in the mud, tiny marks that vanished in the next minute beneath the falling rain. For a moment, he paused, breathing through the mask of cloth and leather, feeling the rhythm of his heart pounding against his ribs. He was alive, a fact that was both victory and curse. Each heartbeat was a reminder of what he could not share with the dead, and each step forward was a defiance against the certainty that surrounded him. By mid-afternoon, the cart was full. Bodies swayed gently as he walked, suspended between the living and the earth, a procession for no one to see. He reached the graveyard, the gates twisted and blackened by time, the stones pale and weathered, etched with names that once sang with laughter. He unfastened the cart, rolling it carefully along the uneven path, every creak of wood a drumbeat of inevitability. As he lifted each corpse, he felt the life that had once been, imagined the warmth, the breath, the pulse that had filled their days. And as he laid them into the shallow graves, the earth sucking them into its cold embrace, he whispered the names aloud, names he may never have known, names he was learning now in the act of letting go. The sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the cemetery. Mist crawled across the graves like a living thing, softening the edges of stone and soil, merging the dead into the landscape of the night. He paused, leaning on his spade, and looked over the rows of unmarked earth. The graves filled not with the stories of kings or knights, but with nameless souls, each as vibrant, as loved, as mourned in life as any who had ever drawn a sword or worn a crown. He imagined the city behind him, houses shuttered, families huddled, and understood that his work, grim and lonely, was the hinge upon which survival balanced. Without him, the dead would choke the streets, the living would lose even the faintest thread of hope. A crow cawed from a twisted branch, startling him, and for a heartbeat, he was tempted to think it a messenger, a harbinger of the next wave of loss. Night falls like a shroud over the encampment, swallowing the horizon in a cloak of smoke and cloud. Stars, once distant guides, are smothered, hidden behind the gray wash of winter's breath. Frost bites into the earth, stiffening the blankets around shivering soldiers. They huddle close, not for warmth, but for the fragile illusion of comfort, as empty stomachs gnaw like small, persistent wolves. Whispers float between them, trembling phantoms of memory, fragile as ice on a frozen pond. Some speak of home in hushed tones, the names of mothers, fathers, sisters, or sweethearts slipping past lips cracked by cold and worry. Others remain silent, listening instead to the mournful chorus of wind sweeping through tattered tents. The air is pungent with the scent of burning peat, mingled with iron and sweat. A smell once associated with sustenance now turned to memory, a reminder of warmth that has fled. One young soldier cradles a small, worn locket in his gloved hands, fingertips tracing the blurred image within. A mother's gentle gaze, a sister's faint smile. His eyes, red from wind and sleeplessness, mist with tears he does not dare shed. Around him, comrades hum faint melodies from distant villages, familiar tunes warped by fatigue and longing. Their voices crack against the cold, yet they persist, as though the music itself could stave off the darkness pressing in from all sides. Horses stand tethered nearby, stamping in the frost, nostrils streaming clouds of vapor. Their warmth is a small comfort, companions in shared misery, creatures who do not ask questions, who do not demand hope but merely endure alongside men whose courage teeters on exhaustion. Lanterns swing with the breath of the wind, casting long, trembling shadows across the canvas walls of tents. These tents, stitched from desperation and patched with memories of battle, have witnessed fevered coughs, hunger-driven fights, and the silent surrender of comrades who could fight no more. They are stained with blood, soot, and the dirt of 1,000 marches, silent witnesses to lives stretched thin like the ropes that hold them upright. Nearby, a rope swings from a broken scaffold, brushing the frozen earth. Its slow, rhythmic movement is almost hypnotic, a grim metronome marking the fragility of existence. It is a silent symbol of the precarious edge upon which these soldiers balance. One misstep, one lapse in fortune, could plummet a man from life to death. Fingers clutch swords at the ready, weapons both familiar and foreign. Some dulled by battle, others new and untested. Yet they are all useless against the gnawing void within, a hunger that cannot be sated by meat or bread, a fear that cannot be repelled by iron or steel. Every cough, every groan of horse or man, every creak of frozen timber is an echo of struggle, an unseen enemy that stalks these men more cruelly than any army. Starvation, cold, sickness. These are the foes that do not rest, that do not pause, that claim their victories quietly, invisibly, beneath the cover of night. The bell tolls somewhere far off, faint yet certain, a voice cutting through the darkness. It speaks of time passing, of faith enduring, of human resilience against the weight of despair. Each toll reverberates through the chest, a heartbeat that is both somber and sustaining. Within this frozen theater of survival, small gestures become monumental. A hand extended to steady a comrade, a blanket shared despite its insufficiency, a song hummed with cracked lips, all are defiance. They are proofs that even when the world reduces a man to bone and shiver, to hunger and longing, humanity still clings stubbornly to its dignity. Eyes meet across the frost, silent understanding passing between them. You are not alone. Though the wind slices like knives and the earth beneath is hard as stone, the warmth of solidarity endures, invisible yet more potent than any fire. The young soldier presses the locket closer, drawing strength from memory. The faces within are distant but alive, tethering him to a world beyond mud and frost. Around him, the camp shifts subtly. Horses snort and paw, tents sway in the wind, and the soldiers, though exhausted, remain upright. In the shadows, a few dare to whisper prayers, not for victory, but for continuation, for another day to bear witness, for the faintest chance that tomorrow might bring bread, warmth, or a glimpse of home. The night stretches endlessly, yet there is rhythm in the darkness. Lanterns swing in tandem with wind gusts, casting flickering mosaics of light and shadow. The soundscape is a symphony of endurance. The rasping of breath, the metallic ring of weapons shifting in hands, the distant tolling of the bell marking a passage unheeded by the living but respected by the dead. Every sound is magnified in the silence, carrying weight and meaning beyond its physical form. Each moment stretches into eternity, a meditation on suffering and resilience intertwined. In this nocturnal crucible, even despair has texture. Frost crystals cling to hair and clothing, biting the skin, embedding themselves in the marrow of bones. The air tastes faintly of ash and iron, each inhalation a reminder of battles fought and lives lost. The heart beats against these elements, stubborn and slow, a defiance written not in words but in endurance. A soldier coughs, another groans, and yet the rhythm continues. A pulse shared across the encampment, a chorus of survival louder than the silence. As dawn threatens its arrival in the distant gray, the soldiers lie awake, bodies stiff, eyes scanning the gloom for shadows that might conceal danger or opportunity. And in the midst of shivering, in the quiet defiance of men too weary to hope fully, there is something luminous, a pulse of humanity that refuses to be extinguished. Even when the battles are unwinnable, even when hunger gnaws at the belly and frost bites the skin, dignity persists. It survives in glances, in touches, in whispered songs from home. It survives in the act of breathing, of waiting, of remembering that life continues even under the heaviest sky. The rope sways once more, brushing the frost, a final reminder of the razor edge upon which all hang. The wind rises, carrying faint echoes of voices and hooves, of struggle and endurance. Somewhere beyond the tents, the first hint of light will come, and with it, the promise of continuation. The soldiers remain, shivering yet upright, fragile yet unbroken, bound together by circumstance and choice. In this night of ice and shadow, they have endured, and in endurance lies the quiet heartbeat of hope, the unspoken vow that the story does not end here.